Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Greg Masters, and I'm the managing editor of SC Magazine, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webcast, The Insider Threat, Protecting Your Organization from the Inside Out, sponsored by Lancope, which in late December was acquired by Cisco. Empowered by social engineering tactics that result in the divulgence of information, external attackers cleverly mask themselves with privileged access. But your employees and contractors pose a risk as well. Sometimes they unwittingly get duped into being an accessory to a crime instigated by someone from the outside who can promise a share of the booty. At other times, their motivations could be more intentional, as when former NSA contractor Edward Snowden leaked classified information to the mainstream media. In either case, according to Forrester, abuse by malicious insiders makes up 25% of today's data breaches. Our speaker today, Andrew Wild, the CISO at Lancope, will be explaining best practices and technologies you should be implementing now to avoid becoming the next victim of a high-profile attack. He will detail how you can become aware of the different types of insider threats and how you can know about emerging attack methods that could further escalate insider threats in the coming years. Andrew Wild is a longtime information security and risk management professional who has spent more than 25 years developing information security, incident response, compliance, and secure networking practices. Previously, he held top security positions at Qualys, EMC, and Transaction Network Services. Just a note before we get started, there will be a Q&A following Andrew's presentation, so we encourage you to type in any questions for him via the interface. And with that, welcome, Andrew. We're pleased to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Greg. I'm very pleased to be able to spend some time this afternoon with all of you, speaking and sharing some information about protecting your organizations. So with that, let's get started. Greg gave a bit of an introduction into who I am, but for those of you that aren't necessarily as familiar with Lancope, which, as Greg mentioned, has recently joined the Cisco family, Lancope is a leading provider of network visibility and security intelligence solutions. We do this principally by analyzing NetFlow, IPFix, and other kinds of network telemetry data. Our solution is called StealthWatch, and I'll talk a bit about how we use context-aware security analytics that help us quickly detect a wide range of attacks. Greg mentioned a bit about my background on the slide in front of you. You'll see some of the places I've been and some of the places I've studied at. I started my career in network engineering, working both in the United States Army and some of the larger telecoms on network design and engineering. I moved into information security through a network path and have been working in the security field for quite a while, as Greg mentioned. So with that, let's go ahead and get started into the presentation. So the first thing I want to talk about, just to set the stage here a little bit for the inside threat, is to talk about where cyber conflict has come and where we are today when we talk about cyber conflict. Things have changed quite a bit over the last 25 years. It's useful to take a moment to look at where we've been. So if we take a look back in the 1980s, we had the origin of some attacks. This is the first starting point of hacking and cybercrime. Most of the attacks at that point were largely manual attack. We're talking about things like war dialing, phone phreaking. These are people, for the most part, exploring and trying to exploit vulnerable systems for things and get out and discover and find what they could do. At this point, as defenders, our primary response was manual type defenses. We're talking about disconnecting the systems that were exposed to prevent those remote folks from getting to them. But it didn't end there. In the late 80s, we began to see some of these manual attacks becoming automated. You can call them mechanized attacks if you want. This is where we had the beginning of software viruses and worms. Many of you will no doubt remember the first well-known worm, the Morris worm, back in 1988. We did continue through more and more advanced viruses, and viruses have now unfortunately become a very well-known part of anyone's vocabulary that uses a computer. As defenders, what we chose to do at this point in time to defend against these new mechanized attacks was we implemented some automation on our own. We deployed firewalls at the perimeter. We deployed intrusion detection and later intrusion prevention systems to look and to inspect the payloads of the traffic and to try to block and prevent certain kinds of traffic from coming in. We deploy antivirus onto our computers to try to inspect the executables and the files that were on our computers to prevent known malicious files from being able to execute. But of course, it didn't stop there. Things have continued to advance. We've now, in the late 2000s, began to see very, very highly skilled human actors as well as highly advanced malicious software. Some of the highlights of this particular kind of attacks were some of the attacks known as the Aurora attack, which attacked Google and some of the other very large technology companies. We also saw the RSA hack in 2011. And the response to this as defenders was we moved towards having very specialized, reputation-aware. We went to next-generation firewalls that were application-aware. We've deployed sandboxes and other things to try to advance the state of our defenses to defend against these new kinds of threats. And, of course, the threats continue to evolve. We've seen now the specialized threats and exploits have been packaged in a way that they're now being commoditized and sold on the black market in the dark web as do-it-yourself kits, where folks without that high level of technical sophistication can buy a prepackaged kit to allow them to exploit computers. And how have we responded as defenders to these kinds of attacks, this new kind of conflict? Well, we are beefing up our threat intelligence. We're working to better understand the threat and to understand what kind of defenses will work best against different kinds of threats. This is also the birth, if you will, in 2011 and beyond of the specialized approach to understanding that we need a balance of both preventative measures and detective measures. But despite that, the threats landscape is still decidedly unfair to folks trying to defend networks. If we look at this particular graphic, which I'm particularly fond of just because of the nice way it visualizes the world's largest data breaches, this one comes from www.informationisbeautiful.net. It's a very nice depiction of some of the largest threats that have occurred. And what you're looking at, the size of these bubbles here indicate the size of the breach, measured typically in terms of the number of records that were compromised. Some of the largest ones on here I'm sure we've all heard of. We heard of the Target breach. We know very well, unfortunately, about the U.S. OPM breaches. We know about Ashley Madison, and while it might be kind of funny to chuckle about there, it's still a significant intrusion, and the fact that these keep happening means that everyone is at risk. So let's talk about some of the statistics. I showed you the bubble chart a moment ago that depicted the size of the breaches. This is another source that gives us an idea of the magnitude of the problem we're facing. Here in this source from the Identity Theft Resource Center, and they do a great job of updating this. If you've never visited this site, I encourage you to take a look at it and see what they have. They update this, I believe, on every Tuesday with new statistics. This one was for the year end. I pulled this one just last week. It wraps up what happened in 2015, and you'll notice that they claimed 781 breaches with over 169 million records disclosed. Very, very sobering information. And to drill into this in terms of the categories of what kind of organizations suffered these losses, which entities were targeted and reported these disclosures, you can see the breakdown here. Banking, credit, financial, 3%, business, just under 10%, educational, under 0.5%, Government, over 20%, very, very large. OPM, no doubt, a large portion of that with the amount of records that were taken from OPM in 2015. And then the last category, which includes the lion's share, over 66% of the records that were disclosed in this report, medical health care, which should be alarming to all of us, because while credit cards can be reissued and shut off, it's really hard to remake who you are. Our medical history is ours, and the fact that so many medical records are being stolen is truly alarming. Let's look at some of the headlines that have accompanied some of these statistics and these numbers. This is an article from a page in my local paper here in the Northern Virginia area, the Washington Post. If you note the date in this case, you'll see this is talking about this year's OPM breach, talking about the federal data that was compromised. Zoom in a little bit here so you can see the date, June 5th, 2015. This was suspected of being an attack by a foreign entity, the Chinese in this case. Here's another news article from the Washington Post on the exact same topic, although if you look carefully, you'll note this one was from nearly a year earlier. So these attacks continue to happen. And it's not just targeted at government agencies. Here's a page that shows that one of the leading security firms, Kaspersky, was attacked as well. And if you like irony, here's one that's interesting as well. A password storing company, LastPass, was hacked. So the point here is that everyone is a target. And when we turn our focus a little bit more to inside kind of attacks, this is one that I think is particularly interesting. Some recent news out of this on this story just within the last few weeks, that the ex-Cardinals executive pled guilty to hacking the Astros database. In this case, from what we know from reading the public information that's been made available, was that an employee that was working for the Cardinals left the Cardinals and went to the Astros. This particular Cardinals employee, the executive that pled guilty, was concerned that the former employee that went to the Astros may have taken some proprietary information, intellectual property of the Cardinals, and was using it at his new job with the Astros. So allegedly what he did was when the laptop was recovered, he found credentials on the laptop. This was the Cardinals laptop. He suspected that the employee was probably using the same password or a derivative thereof in his new job at the Astros, and he used that password and tried and was able to successfully enter into their systems. And from there, he was able to gather significant amounts of intellectual property belonging to the Astros and was able to continually get through their systems. So let's take a minute and I'll share what I think as a CISO when these things happen, and what are things that come to my mind when I am reading the headlines or listening to NPR or the radio, or I'm looking at Twitter and I'm hearing about another breach in the news, whether it's Brian Krebs or one of the many, many great sources out there to find out what's happening. The first thought is, gosh, not another one of these. These just keep happening. But after the initial shock passes and I start getting a little more reflective about the situation, I begin to ask questions about, okay, well, let's see what we can learn out of this event. What would have happened and how was this particular organization that was attacked different from mine? Would my organization have been able to detect this event? Would we have done better or worse than the latest victim that you're reading a story about? And then into some of the fundamental areas that are just so important to be able to manage security and manage risk in an environment. You know, getting down to the fundamentals like asset management. Do we know the systems we have? And the access control. Do we have privileged credential management systems? Do we monitor the use of privileged credential systems? How was that a part of this most recent attack? Do we have appropriate egress filtering and monitoring in place? Could that have played a role in trying to protect, prevent, or even detect this latest attack from happening? How about network segmentation? Would network segmentation have limited the scope or prevented this attack from happening? And of course, it always comes down to detection, because no matter how good your preventative measures are, in today's day and age, it's really about being able to detect the event. How mature are the capabilities we have, and do we have systems and mechanisms in place that would have been able to detect the kind of attack that's being reported? Do we have that kind of visibility across the environment to be able to see the lateral movement inside our organization by this attack? And finally, it comes down to incident response. Are we as an organization prepared to manage an incident like this? And I'd encourage everyone, when you read about these stories, to reflect on your own organization and your role in the organization to see what you can learn from these events that keep happening to others. Learn from others' misfortunes and strengthen your own abilities. So like I said, regardless of all the defensive measures we're putting in place, these attacks continue to get through. Some of the statistics on the slide in front of you came from the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. If you haven't looked at that before, it's a really good resource. Lots of great information, and they do have some summaries, so you don't have to read the whole thing because it is very lengthy. But essentially where we're looking at here that's so disturbing is the amount of time that elapses before attackers were discovered, the huge number of incidents and the tremendous amount of records that have been compromised, and then the average price tag, the cost to an organization, to a business, when this kind of a breach is suffered. I should also note that another excellent resource to consult is Mandiant's threat report. They're also very good as well. Now, when we talk about the insider threat, I think it's important to understand some terminology in terms of what do we mean by an insider, because in today's day and age, organizations don't function as tightly closed environments. We have very large ecosystems in which we operate, and we have folks that fall into multiple categories that have access to valuable information that we have, to our assets. Of course, we have employees, and we know and have understood that employers are insiders for a long time, but also contractors are insiders, and contractors oftentimes have access to significant amounts of valuable assets. And finally, we have partners. Partners oftentimes have access to internal systems, and they also can play a role, and we need to consider them as part of our insider threat programs. So let's go through some nice graphics here from a really helpful report that Lancope put out that talks about some of the reality of the insider threats. We're going to talk about some of the statistics that have been gathered from numerous industry reports and walk through helping you understand the nature of the threat and then what can be done about it. So we talk about insiders. Let's take a snapshot back of another news article here. We talked about Target, and we talked about partners. In this case, Target, we know now that their large breach occurred because of an access that a trusted third-party entity, their HVAC contracting company, had to their systems. Now, unfortunately, in the case of Target, it appears, from what we've read since this event, that they didn't have adequate segmentation and that the HVAC systems were not properly isolated from the rest of the company's assets. But the lesson here is that you must also consider those trusted third parties when you're developing your insider threat program, because they do have access. Another kind of an insider threat, we talked before, Greg mentioned Edward Snowden in the introduction. Certainly here, we know that he was actually a contractor working for the NSA, but he had access to very high-level classified information, and he chose to abuse his access to that information. Here's another example of an insider. This article was from last fall, talking about an individual who was employed by the LA Times, and he had access to their content management system. And what was alleged was that he gave credentials to that system to third parties that eventually defaced the LA Times website and were able to, because of that access to the content management system, to change what people saw when visiting the LA Times website for news. So let's spend a minute here talking about why insider threats are on the rise. There's lots of reasons for this. We're going to talk about the three categories right here, how networking and technology is changing that makes it much more difficult for organizations to secure and manage the risks to their assets. First of all, we have the bring your own device phenomena, which has fundamentally changed both how we work as individuals, but also how our IT staff and how our security teams protect and manage risk against our IT systems. This has tremendously increased the difficulty of securing environments. The typical IT organization is not able to fully understand in many organizations how many different devices are in their environment because of the exposure to BYOD. This consumerization of information technology has really had a profound effect on organizations and how they protect their networks. How the changes to the networks themselves have also, though, had a significant change. We have much more outsourcing going on now. We're using third-party technologies. We have adopted cloud computing. This has significantly increased the attack surface and has made it difficult in times for IT organizations that are responsible for ensuring proper security mechanisms are in place and operated. If they don't even know about a particular type of information technologies used, it becomes very hard for them to monitor and secure it. And finally, this one has been around for as long as there have been people. Social engineering does not go away. It is certainly one of the easiest ways for an attacker or a threat agent to get access to that sensitive information. Most people have a sincere desire to want to contribute and want to help. And when someone asks for help, most people are very willing to go out of their way to help someone else because they think that if they were in a similar situation, they would want that courtesy back. The problem is that folks with malicious intentions will oftentimes use this tactic to trick people into granting access to things that which they would not otherwise have access. So when we try to categorize the kinds of, the types of insider threats, we can talk about, the malicious insider who is trying to intentionally harm the organization. There are lots of motivations why someone would be malicious. They could be a disgruntled employee. They could be someone that is fallen on very hard times and has been persuaded or encouraged or bribed to be able to provide that information to a third party. We also have the compromised kinds of opportunities, threats here. This is typically access credentials that have been compromised. It could be done through phishing. It could be just given. In the case of the LA Times, it's alleged that that editor there at the LA Times, a contributor, gave his credentials to the content management system to one of the hacking organizations. And then there's also negligence. Negligence plays a role. We know that our employees are not always as skilled at using the technology as they should be, and they may not also always be as up-to-date on the proper techniques for doing things. Most people are trying to get their job done, and sometimes, unfortunately, the easier way to get something done puts the organization at risk. So it's important to educate your employees. But quite often, there are negligent actions that can take place that accidentally expose data. Looking at some of the statistics for malicious actors, the graphic here says that 1 out of 4 breaches were caused by malicious insiders. That's not a great number there to think that 25% of all your breaches are caused by people that we trust, the people that we go to work with, the people that we have lunch with. That is not a good number. And more than that, this is an interesting piece of research that came out from ClearSwift last summer. They did a survey, and I'll go into some of the details here in a little way so you can read it a little bit easier, but what they found was really disturbing. Some of the statistics here, really disheartening to learn that when they surveyed 4,000 employees in the U.S., Europe, and Australia, to discover that a quarter of them would sell company data, risking their jobs as well as criminal convictions for less than $8,000. And that 3% of those employees would sell private information for as little as $155. And these numbers here are very startling. And if you think that your employees and that your staff members and your agency members aren't potential inside threats, you're wrong. The numbers are very clear. And most of the time, the people that are falling prey to this don't understand the whole significance of how that amount of information and what it means to the organization. They don't see it. It's like, well, I don't really know anything in the company. I only know this one little piece. Well, the malicious actors are very well adept at piecing together the smaller pieces. Another concern when we're talking about the insider threat is compromised IDs. Two out of three breaches exploit weak or stolen passwords. What this means is that they're not typically happening by some kind of a very elaborate 0 day. We're talking about stolen passwords, weak passwords. These are things that we ought to be able to control. And here's a number that isn't surprising, but is still yet disappointing. 95% of all the cybercrime is triggered by user action. That's clicking on the link, that's opening the attachment, that's going to a website that you ought not to visit that has no legitimate business purpose. So all these bad things happen, and we talked about before about the tremendous amount of time between the breach occurring and the detection. Here again, we're back on the screen saying 243 days on average before advanced attackers are detected. That's a tremendous amount of time to crawl through your network, to be able to pull out information. So when we talk about are we prepared to deal with these threats, you can see here that the majority of folks are saying, no, we're not prepared to deal with these. We need to do a better job here. So on this slide, I'm talking about some very basic, high-level ideas of how to manage this insider threat that we've talked about. The very first thing is create a strong insider policy. Now, this is not typically something that is done by an information security team, but this is something in which the information security team would play a role in part of the insider threat program. Typically, insider threat programs are managed as a risk by the organization's risk management team with strong collaboration between the legal team and the HR team and IT. You should work to improve awareness of your employees, to make sure they're aware that they are likely to be targeted, that even though they may not feel that they have access to tremendous amounts of proprietary information, what they have is valuable. And HR security continues to play a role in strong risk management processes, and it's also a very big part of managing the insider threat. You should have strong hiring processes, good background screening, and ongoing programs to ensure that people are screened not just at the time of hire, but depending upon the kind of information that the agency or organization deals with, there may be a need for ongoing background checks to understand whether that person is more at risk for being targeted. Are they having financial hardships? Do they have some kind of a out-of-work problem that may cause them to be more susceptible to being targeted? And of course, we cannot ignore the other people that make up our insiders. Those are our contractors and our trusted third parties. We need to apply very rigorous hiring and subcontracting processes to make sure we know about the subcontractors and the contractors that come into our organization, and we need to be able to manage the risk from third parties. Most organizations now depend on a tremendous number of third parties to accomplish their function. We need to be able to have strong processes in place to manage the risk from contractors and third parties. And lastly, and this is the part I'm going to spend the bulk of the presentation talking about, you need to have processes in place and tools to allow you to monitor the employees. This is to look for those anomalous things that are happening, to find out who is accessing what and what are the changes. This is really where the IT security and the IT organization can really augment and help the insider threat program of an organization, because IT and IT security manage the systems that hold the bulk of the IT intellectual property, and they can help manage and implement systems to monitor and alert on changes to that. But one of the biggest problems, though, when we talk about monitoring and collecting information from IT systems is this fact of the lack of context. If you've been in IT for any length of time, you no doubt have been aware of and dealt with the tremendous amount of information that's available today. You can be just overwhelmed with information. In the case of the Target breach, we had heard that they had systems that were, in fact, alarming on this activity that was happening, but yet no one paid any attention to it. Well, that's likely because the fact of tremendous volume of alarms and information that come out of our systems today. There's so much information, it's very difficult to be able to discern which information should be acted upon and which information does not require action at this point in time. We really need to add context to the information to be able to make that kind of intelligent decision as to what to do. We need to know the who, the how, the where, the what, and the when. And unfortunately, many of the alarms we get today don't correlate all those different kinds of context together. So the approach to take to be able to really manage this is to be able to have a system in place that can both monitor, detect, analyze, and respond across the entire threat landscape. And I'll explain this in a bit more over the next couple slides. And the reason why this is so important, and we talked about the challenge of detection earlier, the fact that we know from the reports that have come out, in the page here we see Verizon's data breach investigations report, that our time to compromise in the red line here, the attackers are getting better and better, and they're faster, and they're more able to compromise our networks than before. So in this case here, we see that the time to compromise is approaching, it's over 75% when it's measured in days. But the time to discovery is lagging significantly behind that. It takes a tremendously, much more time for us to discover the intrusions. And what that means, this difference between the blue line and the red line, indicates that the attackers, when they're inside the network, they have a tremendous advantage in that they have time to operate before they're detected and eradicated. So I said we need to change this game. How do we do this? We know that the problem is, and we've heard this asymmetric time and time again, defenders have to be able to find and fix hundreds of vulnerabilities, and the attackers only need to find one to get in. We need to turn this paradigm upside down and look at it from the point of view that the attackers have to execute a complex series of steps to be able to get the information they need. But as defenders, we only need to detect one of those complex series of operations to be able to find them and then work towards eradicating them. Let's talk a little bit about the phase of the attack continuum, also called the cyber kill chain. This came out from Lockheed Martin several years ago. It's a good way of looking at how attacks happen. If you look, there's the initial infiltration into the environment. Then there are a series of operations that occur, and then there's the exfiltration of the data. Because whether it's an external attacker or an insider attacker, what is always constant is the fact that there is something of value that someone is trying to take out and monetize. They want some kind of information, whether it's blueprints, plans, sales forecasts, whatever the particular kind of asset is that's desired. The intent is to get access to the system, perform the operations necessary, and then get the data out. But along those, between the infiltration and the exfiltration, those series of operations can be broken down as described in the cyber kill chain as reconnaissance, which leads into exploitation. Oftentimes this is done through social engineering, phishing your employees or tricking them over the phone. You've got that initial point of infection, which could be through phishing. It could be through any kind of a drive-by website malware downloaded. It could be an infected attachment. Lots of different ways. We've all got those emails before. You've got a package coming. Please click here. Please click on this to see this invoice. Lots of things come in by email. Email is one of the primary vectors here. After the initial infection, the attacker attempts to establish command and control. And what that means is that they're able to establish control from the remote point into that infected foothold inside your network. They then begin the internal pivot, also called the lateral movement, where they begin searching for the asset that they seek. And then when they get the asset, get access to that asset, they work to prepare the data they want to take and then exfiltrate the data. And typically along here, they'll also try to clean up their tracks depending on how advanced they are. So what we need to do as we can apply this continuous response loop of monitoring, detecting, analyzing, responding. Apply this along the entire path of this attack continuum. And what this does, I talked before about the ability to turn the paradigm upside down and make it so that the attacker has to not just successfully get in, but then continually avoid being detected at every one of his steps in the cyber kill chain here. So we're going to apply our monitor, detect, analyze, and respond methodology across the entire kill chain. This gives us numerous opportunities to detect and find the attacker, to find that insider who is accessing information they shouldn't, to find that person that is gained a foothold in the network and is pivoting through, trying to find the code repository, or trying to find, the HR database, or trying to find the patient history. Really what we're talking about here is raising the cost to the adversaries through continuous response. This ability of ours to go and insert our processes into every step of the kill chain. So how do we improve this? How do we do this monitoring and detection response? Well, it begins with strong detection. And there are different ways and different methodologies for detection. And let's talk for a minute about the three different kinds and where they apply, because a combination of detection mechanisms is often the best way to go. Some of the three of the most common kinds of methodologies, when we talk about detection, they're broken down into signature-based detection methodology. This is where we're inspecting one piece of data and comparing it to a known blacklist. Some of the most common examples of signature-based detection is intrusion prevention, antivirus, content filtering. These are all technologies. They're all detection methods where we are comparing information that we observe against content that's known to be bad. Signature. It works well in certain environments, not so well in other environments. We'll talk about that in a minute. You also have behavioral-based detection. This is where we're observing the behavior of a particular entity, a user or a system, and we're doing that against a list of known bad activities. So things that work this way are sandboxes. You put the piece of software in the sandbox and you look to see how it operates. And if it does things that are known to be bad, you know that it's very suspect. You've got network behavioral anomaly detection systems that do this. You've got host intrusion prevention systems that do this. They're looking to see, what is happening on the host. How are they? Which processes are they spawning up? What behavior is being exhibited? It's not looking at byte patterns of a file, which is signature-based. This is behavioral-based. And also, we can also put the security information event management, SIMS tools, into this category because they are looking at the behavior. They're correlating certain kinds of triggers against known bad triggers. A SIM can do this by saying, look, I've got information from a physical door lock here that's saying this employee just walked into this room, but yet my VPN system said he just VPN'd in from across the world. Those kind of correlation, that's behavioral-based detection. And then lastly, we have the anomaly-based detection mechanism in which we're going to compare the victim's behavior against a known good list. So what we're doing here is we are establishing a baseline. We've observed this system over a period of time, and we know what they typically do. This particular system is an engineering system, and we never see communications from this engineering server to the human resources server. That's what we're talking about when we talk about anomaly. We're looking for that exception. It's not signature-based. And when we look at the matrix at the bottom, it lays out three different types of exploits that can happen. Your known exploits, signature clearly is going to be the best. This is where we're looking for a particular known kind of attack. We know what it looks like. We know what the byte pattern is. Signature is a really good detection mechanism for that kind of exploit. Behavioral can function in this environment too. Anomaly, not so much. We talk about zero-day exploits. These are exploits that have not been seen before, so you would expect that the signature-based detection mechanism is not very good at it because it's not been seen before. There is no signature written for this, so it's not going to be able to detect it. Behavioral-based are very good at finding these because typically these exploits will do something that is known to be bad, so the behavioral base can pick that up. Anomaly detection is also very good at this. And then lastly, another kind of attack, credential abuse. This kind of exploit, signature detection, is very limited in its ability to do this. Behavioral can do some of it. Best is anomaly. So one way to approach this, and this is what we've done at Lancope with StealthWatch, is we have leveraged the network telemetry data to allow you to use what you already have in your environment. Your network sees all the packets. It sees everything. So what we're talking about here is leveraging your network as a sensor. The network has visibility from edge to access of all the packets that traverse the network. It's a tremendous resource if you can leverage the knowledge that your network has about what's happening in your network to develop baselines and report on those anomalies. And the way that the network telemetry data works is what we call flow. This has been oftentimes explained as being analogous to a phone bill. When you get your phone bill, you get a list of the metadata from the phone calls. We know the originating phone number, the destination phone number, the time, the duration. We get those small bits of information that are very important to understand what happened. Well, we do the same thing with network flow. As the packet traverses the network, the different network devices that reside in the network that will create these flow records will take out the destination IP, the origin IP, the port, the protocol, and the QoS tag, and report that information in the flow cache. This information can then be aggregated, and from this flow record, you know what's happening on your network. You can then take this information into a system, and this is what StealthWatch really excels at, by collecting this flow data and then establishing that baseline behavior. You know what these systems, the other systems with whom they communicate with, how much data is exchanged, how long the sessions are, and then by establishing that baseline, you can then look for anomalies. In the picture here, you'll see that we have a grouping of systems that have been categorized as exchange servers, and there is one data point here. This is clearly different from the others. This is something that needs to be investigated. The way StealthWatch does this is we have a behavioral detection model. We ingest the flows. From those flows, we have a number of security algorithms that generate different kinds of security events. Here you can see there are over 94 different kinds of security events. The events then are when certain thresholds are hit, the events trigger alarms, and there are different categories of alarms that can allow you to customize the response as well as the thresholds under which the alarm fires. And then for the alarm, there's an appropriate response. It could be a notification. It could be some mitigation action, many different ways in which these happen. So with this behavioral detection model that I'm describing with StealthWatch, you have complete visibility of the traffic that's passing across your network. You're able to store this data for a fairly lengthy time, in most cases 90 days or more, which allows you the ability to go back in time and look at what happened. And you can maintain a complete understanding of who is talking to whom within your network. You can apply rules based upon where the systems are located that allow you to construct logical boundaries to understand the traffic, whether it's inside to inside or outside to inside or inside to outside or command and control traffic. We augment the data that comes from the network telemetry, that flow data, with other pieces of context because, as I mentioned earlier, context is very important to be able to have actionable information to help you with that. And the kinds of contextual information that can be added are things, one of the primary kinds is identity. Not just what's the IP address, but who is the user that was assigned to, that was on the machine that had that IP address at the time of the flow. This allows you to have much greater visibility. You have the ability to audit. You can account. You can profile your users. You can detect the internal threats by having this pervasive visibility across the network. So to conclude, we know the data breaches are continuing, and they're not getting any smaller. We also know that as IT security experts, we have an unending need for more talent, and it's very hard to get that. We know that the only way we're going to be able to manage this is through automation. We know that cybersecurity is a knowledge-based game, in that it's really important to have the essential information. Leverage the strength that you have. You should know your network better than your threat agent does. Use the network as your sensor. All the data has to traverse the network. Leverage the capabilities of the money that you've invested in your network. And finally, we know that context-aware security analytics can make detection better and can accelerate the response through that continuous response loop we talked about. So that's the end of my presentation. At this point, Greg, I'll hand it back to you, and we can cover some questions.
Okay, very good, Andrew. Thank you for your presentation. I thought it was very lucid and really lays out the problem and some solutions. And if you're ready, we do have a number of questions that have come in for you.
Absolutely. Let's
okay. Okay, here we go. First one, what motivates these cyber attackers to hack into someone else's network? Are they paid cyber criminals hired by someone else?
Well, the motivations vary considerably. There are lots of different motivators as to why these insiders decide to attack their own organization. Some of the motivations are, we can go through the long list of what they are, but just off the top of my head, the ones that I recall the most common are you have disgruntled employees. If you remember back several years ago, there was an issue out on the Bay and the West Coast there where BART, the rapid transit organization that runs the subway and the buses out there, their whole IT network was down because their system admin left and he took the password to the network systems with him and wouldn't give it back. He was disgruntled. He was unhappy. So you've got disgruntled employees. You have people that are just looking to make money. They've been determined to be someone that could be coerced or encouraged to sell information they have for money. Greed is a very common motivator. You also have, and we know this happens too, you have the social activists, the people that feel allegiance to a cause. And they are either they volunteer or they are coerced into helping with some social cause that may put the organization at risk. So lots of different motivations for why people would do this. And it's key to really understand your employees and understand the threat. That is part of your insider program, is to try to do a threat analysis of what motivations might be appropriate within your organization.
Okay, so that leads into this question perhaps. What departments within an organization should be primarily responsible for defending against insider threats?
I mentioned this briefly earlier, and it's a really good question because typically, an insider threat program is a very large, overarching program that falls under the purview of risk management. It's one of the risks that an organization has and faces. So the insider threat program should be one component of an organization's overall risk management program. Typically, when we talk about insider threat, because of the heavy reliance upon people, the people are the most common component of the inside threat. HR plays a very critical role in this inside threat program. The legal team is oftentimes plays a very, very important role, and IT security oftentimes also play a very big role because of the fact that IT and IT security manage the tools and they manage the systems on which the intellectual property and which our assets typically reside. So it's a combination of those three, although in general, IT and IT security are not leading insider threat programs. They're providing valuable support through deploying and managing systems that are either very strong at preventing or detecting, or hopefully both, in the IT systems.
Okay, and this is a related question, Andrew. I always thought of insider threats as being employees that wanted to do harm to an organization, such as steal data, as you've mentioned. However, it sounds like all threats end up inside the network. Is it possible to prevent this? And then follow up, how should this fact affect the mindset of my security team?
And this is something that's up for debate right now. There are different ways of looking at the inside threat. Many times it is focused just on what do those trusted parties, whether you're your employees or contractors, and your partners, trusted partners, what do they have access to, and how do we manage and educate them and monitor them? But also, it's become much more apparent now that the way in which organizations are being attacked today is they actually are being attacked from the inside out. The organization, the target is being phished, or somehow their system is being compromised, and that compromised system is taken inside the organization, inside the network, and now the malicious actor, whether they are actually an employee or a third party, has much greater access. And this is back to we've talked about this to security professionals for years, that the perimeter is dead, but we really haven't completely moved our line of thinking. The way to really focus on this is the understanding, and I think most of us have gotten to this point now, understanding the importance of detection. Yes, we need prevention still, but detection, be able to have the ability to know what's happening on the network, to understand the baseline, and to detect anomalies is really fundamental.
Okay, and someone's asking you to get really specific now. How does the Lancope tool compare to McAfee Nitro, or any other SIM for that matter, in regard to analyzing, interpreting, correlating flows?
Well, let's keep in mind that StealthWatch is not a SIM. StealthWatch is a network visibility and security intelligence solution that ingests network telemetry data and augments that telemetry data with other kinds of contextual information. So it's not a SIM. Many of our customers successfully use StealthWatch with their SIM. The events and the notifications that come out of StealthWatch can be ingested into a SIM for proper event management. But the key fundamental, the advantage that StealthWatch has is those behavioral algorithms, the ability to ingest the flow data, to understand which system is talking to which system on which ports, how much data, how long, and then compare that against the historical baseline to know whether or not that is anomalous and if it's a concern. To be able to detect that a particular system is scanning the network. That's the kind of thing that a SIM on its own won't do. Now, there are some SIMs that do have components and they ingest flow information, but we feel very strongly that StealthWatch is better than SIMs because StealthWatch is a purpose-built network visibility security intelligence solution. It doesn't also do flow. It is about network telemetry and being able to add the contextual information to leverage the algorithms to help you really understand and identify those anomalous situations.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Here's another question. It seems like insider threats would be difficult to detect because the malicious actors are inside the network operating as a credentialed user. So how can I realistically detect an insider threat?
That is the big problem, right? Is because when your insiders are in there, they're using legitimate credentials. They're not hacking away. They're not typically pounding. But there are behaviors that can be detected. Oftentimes, in the case of some of the ones that we do know about, individuals access data that they ordinarily would not do as a part of their job. So it's about being able to establish baselines of normal behavior. If the engineer is now, and looking at patterns, if the engineer typically works with the source code management system and he works on a particular project and his normal behavior is he's working on this module, he's uploading, he's downloading back and forth, and now all of a sudden he didn't just pull down one branch of one project, he pulled down the entire project to which he had access. Now, there might be a legitimate reason for that, but that is a different kind of behavior. And by looking at the amount of data that's transferred back and forth, by understanding the flow between that particular end user's system and the server to which he connects, that likely would be an anomalous and would be reported as an event that needs to be investigated. Okay. But it is a difficult thing. This is part of the challenge of dealing with inside threats. We want to empower our employees to do their jobs, but we also have to figure out how we can properly monitor to look for when people are doing things outside of the scope of their normal business that might be malicious. It might be something that their job, their role changed. It might not be malicious, but we need to be able to identify those those edge cases, and investigate.
Okay, that's good. Thank you, Andrew. You showed some slides, some statistics indicating how long it takes sometimes to catch an anomaly. So this question pertains to that. If an insider threat acts very quickly to steal data, how can I catch them quickly enough to stop them before data is stolen? Or can I slow them down to give me more time?
Well, typically what you hope is that your detection mechanism is good enough that you can slow them down to the point that you'll be able to detect and respond. That's the goal. That's the hope. And the way to accomplish that is to layer in different kinds of preventative controls along with the detective controls to make sure you have the adequate logging so that you can really ingest as much information as possible to correlate and identify anomalous situations that you can react to. The truth of the matter is, this is why when we talk about an insider threat program, it's not only about technology. When I listed the different components of an insider threat program, monitoring employees was one component. There are many others. We talked about HR security, about conducting background checks on your employees, about understanding the threat landscape. Those things are also important components. No one piece of the program can be 100% successful all the time, and that's why the programs are built of these different techniques and approaches to trying to manage the insider threat. It is very difficult when you're trying to manage and balance between, at some point, you have to have a certain amount of trust in your employees, but you also need to keep tabs and protect yourself. It's a difficult thing to balance.
Okay, very good. Another person is asking, I don't have an insider threat program right now. Where is the best place to start?
There's a lot of great information out there. The FBI has a number of really good resources on insider threat. The Carnegie Mellon organization, CERT, has a tremendous amount of information on understanding the insider threat and about components of an effective program. There's a lot of resources out there. I guess if you belong to an organization and you're not aware that they have an insider threat program today, I would encourage to speak to someone that is responsible for the overall risk management program and ask if the insider threat has been considered as and assessed as a risk to the organization. And then look inside to what you can manage. Do you have the kind of visibility within the IT environment that would allow you to detect malicious actions by an insider? Are you collecting the logs you need? These kinds of things that you can control. Think about those.
Okay, Andrew, thank you. I think we have time for one more question. What is the biggest mistake you see organizations make in regard to combating insider threats?
I would say, from my point of view, it goes back to what I was saying just before about thinking that technology is the answer to an insider threat program. Technology, monitoring employees, is a component, but it is one component of an overarching risk management program. You have to consider the people and the processes of the organization to have an effective risk management program that addresses the insider threat. You cannot do it with just technology alone. Technology can help automate and can help make your program much more effective, but it cannot be the only component of your program.
Okay, and with that, that's going to be a wrap for this session. Let me extend my thanks to Lancope's Andrew Wild for sharing his insight and expertise today, and of course, thanks to all of you for tuning in. This webcast will be available on demand beginning tomorrow on the SC Magazine website under the Events tab. Andrew's slides will be available for download as a PDF there as well. For SC Magazine, this is Greg Masters. Good day, everyone.